That's what they tell me about marriage. I'm still single, so I don't.
Well, yeah, we could go into that too, but no, I think we have to appreciate, are you infected by your own mitochondria?
Right. uh,
Right?
Yeah.
So, in marriage, you fear the loss of independence, but even though the American therapeutic community may be very concerned about codependence, what's to say that codependence isn't what's necessary to have a stable relationship in which to raise children who are maximally case selected and require incredible amounts of care, because you have to wait 13 years before there's any reproductive payout, and most of us don't want our 13-year-olds having kids. It's a very tricky situation to analyze. And I would say that predators and parasites drive much of our evolution, and I don't know whether to be angry at them or thank them.
Well, ultimately, nobody knows the meaning of life or what even happiness is, but there is some metrics.
They didn't tell you?
They didn't. That's why all the poetry and books are about. There is some metrics under which you can kind of measure how good it is that these AI systems are roaming about. So you're more nervous about software than you are optimistic about ideas of self-replicating large scale.
I don't think we've really felt where we are. Occasionally we get a wake up. 9/11 was so anomalous compared to everything else we've experienced on American soil that it came to us as a complete shock that was even a possibility. What it really was a highly creative and determined R&D team deep in the bowels of Afghanistan, showing us that we had certain exploits that we were open to that nobody had chosen to express. I can think of several of these things that I don't talk about publicly that just seem to have to do with how relatively unimaginative those who wish to cause havoc and destruction have been up until now. But the great mystery of our time, of this particular little era, is how remarkably stable we've been since 1945, when we demonstrated the ability to use nuclear weapons in anger. And we don't know why things like that haven't happened since then. We've had several close calls. We've had mistakes. We've had brinksmanship. And what's now happened is that we've settled into a sense that, it'll always be nothing. It's been so long since something was at that level of danger that we've got a wrong idea in our head. And that's why when I went on the Ben Shapiro show, I talked about the need to resume above ground testing of nuclear devices, because we have people whose developmental experience suggests that when, let's say, Donald Trump and North Korea engage on Twitter, it's nothing. It's just posturing. Everybody's just in it for money. There's a sense that people are in a video game mode, which has been the right call since 1945. We've been mostly in video game mode. It's amazing.
So you're worried about a generation which has not seen any existential...
We've lived under it. You see, you're younger. I don't know if you came from Moscow.
Yeah.
There was a TV show called The Day After that had a huge effect on a generation growing up in the U.S. And it talked about what life would be like after a nuclear exchange. We have not gone through an embodied experience collectively where we've thought about this. And I think it's one of the most irresponsible things that the elders among us have done, which is to provide this beautiful garden in which the thorns are cut off of the rose bushes, and all of the edges are rounded and sanded. And so people have developed this totally unreal idea, which is everything's going to be just fine. And do I think that my leading concern is AGI, or my leading concern is thermonuclear exchange or gene drives or any one of these things? I don't know. But I know that our time here in this very long experiment here is finite, because the toys that we've built are so impressive and the wisdom to accompany them has not materialized. And I think we actually got a wisdom uptick since 1945. We had a lot of dangerous, skilled players on the world stage who nevertheless, no matter how bad they were, managed to not embroil us in something that we couldn't come back from.
The Cold War.
Yeah. And the distance from the Cold War, I'm very mindful of, there was a Russian tradition actually of on your wedding day, going to visit a memorial to those who gave their lives. Can you imagine this? Where you on the happiest day of your life, you go and you pay homage to the people who fought and died in the Battle of Stalingrad. Mm-hmm. I'm not a huge fan of communism, I gotta say, but there were a couple of things that the Russians did that were really positive in the Soviet era. And I think trying to let people know how serious life actually is the Russian model of seriousness is better than the American model.
And maybe, like you mentioned, there was a small echo of that after 9/11. But
we wouldn't let it form. We talk about 9/11, but it's 9/12 that really moved the needle. When we were all just there and nobody wanted to speak. We witnessed something super serious, and we didn't want to run to our computers and blast out our deep thoughts and our feelings. And it was profound because we woke up briefly there. I talk about the gated institutional narrative that sort of programs our lives. I've seen it break 3 times in my life. One of which was the election of Donald Trump. Another time was the fall of Lehman Brothers, when everybody who knew that Bear Stearns wasn't that important knew that Lehman Brothers meant AIG was next. Mm-hmm. And the other one was 9/11. And so if I'm 53 years old and I only remember 3 times that the global narrative was really interrupted, that tells you how much we've been on top of developing events. We had the Murrah Federal Building explosion, but it didn't cause the narrative to break. It wasn't profound enough. Around 9/12, we started to wake up out of our slumber. And the powers that be did not want a coming together. The admonition was go shopping.
The powers that be what is that force as opposed to blaming individuals?
We don't know.
So whatever that
force is, there's a component of it that's emergent and there's a component of it that's deliberate. So give yourself a portfolio with 2 components. Some amount of it is emergent, but some amount of it is also an understanding that if people come together, they become an incredible force. And what you're seeing right now, I think, is there are forces that are trying to come together, and there are forces that are trying to push things apart. And, one of them is the globalist narrative versus the national narrative, where to the globalist perspective, the nations are bad things, in essence, that they're temporary, they're nationalistic, they're jingoistic, it's all negative. To people in the national idiom, they're saying, look, this is where I pay my taxes. This is where I do my army service. This is where I have a vote. This is where I have a passport. Who the hell are you to tell me that because you've moved into some place that you can make money globally, that you've chosen to abandon other people to whom you have a special and elevated duty? And I think that these competing narratives have been pushing towards the global perspective from the elite. And a larger and larger number of disenfranchised people are saying, hey, I actually live in a place and I have laws and I speak a language, I have a culture. And who are you to tell me that because you can profit in some faraway land, that my obligations to my fellow countrymen are so much diminished?
So these tensions between nations and so on, ultimately you see being proud of your country and so on, which creates potentially the kind of things that led to wars and so on. They ultimately, it is human nature, and it is good for us for wake-up calls of different kinds.
Well, I think that these are tensions. And my point isn't, nationalism run amok is a nightmare. And internationalism run amok is a nightmare. And the problem is we're trying to push these pendulums to some place where they're somewhat balanced, where we have a higher duty of care to those who share our laws and our citizenship, but we don't forget our duties of care to the global system. I would think this is elementary, but the problem that we're facing concerns the ability for some to profit at by abandoning their obligations to others within their system. And that's what we've had for decades.